Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the third best-selling main series Pokemon games as of December 2023. That is definitely something to think about. It's been almost 2 years since these games were released, and I thought, why not reflect? I have a ton of thoughts when it comes to Scarlet and Violet, and I have put hundreds of hours into both games. That is correct. I have no life and I have played both games. I'll be going over all of my long and complicated thoughts, which include the game's environment, story, and gameplay, as well as touching on my hopes for the future main series games. Why am I doing this, you may be asking yourself? I literally get asked every single day during my Twitch streams what my thoughts are on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. We also recently got news about a new Pokemon game, so it feels like a good time to reflect on our last main series game and talk about our hopes with the next. So instead of a 2-minute answer during one of my Twitch streams, I decided to write a 20-page script talking about all of my thoughts. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my long and complicated thoughts on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and why I think Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are some of the worst Pokemon games we have ever gotten, with the best story we may ever see in a main series Pokemon game. Part 1, Environment. When Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were first announced, I remember thinking these games were taking place in the shopping mall or something. The trailer was a little, I don't know. The announcement was super exciting, the first proper open world Pokemon game. After playing Breath of the Wild, my expectations were quite high. I was super excited to experience open world Pokemon. One of my favorite parts about Pokemon Sword and Shield was the wild area and exploring the various places and Pokemon that the wild area had to offer. So I was expecting Scarlet and Violet to basically just be Sword and Shield's wild area, but better. And that was just not really what it was. Don't get me wrong, once you finish the hour-long cutscene at the beginning of the game, you do experience open world Pokemon. The game lets you go around and wander about the entire region of Paldea, but the story doesn't really let you go anywhere because there's no level scaling. Going into these games, I assumed you could just go into any gym first, since it is an open world game. That was not the case. I was expecting Scarlet and Violet's gym levels to be based on how many badges a trainer already had, and I was a bit disappointed when Tulip's psychic team demolished me and I had to turn around. I also remember grabbing my first gym badge and immediately getting destroyed by a wild level 40 Tatsugiri while exploring around Casaroya Lake. The wild Pokemon constantly one-shotting me when I was trying to explore made this game feel very limiting. There were definitely moments of this world that felt open world to me. A lot of it did. It wasn't a great feeling though to have to look up the correct order for the gym badges in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet when I first played the game. Now, I understand open world games do need to have, some structure when it comes to the story, but this game felt a lot more linear than I expected, unless I just grinded levels willy-nilly. But I do have really fond memories of whenever the game first came out, just exploring everywhere I possibly could, especially before Mesagoza. I spent a ton of time in the tutorial area of the game. Exploring Poco Path at the start of the game felt super magical because of how interactive the Pokemon are with the environment. I loved seeing Tarantula hanging in the trees and swaying with the wind, Fletchlings hidden on top of branches, Lechonk sleeping at the base of trees. It just felt so immersive. I think I may just be a tiny bit nostalgic for those first few hours of Scarlet and Violet when I knew nothing about the games and I didn't even have a ride Pokemon yet. I was really just running around and exploring. I really love random encounters in Pokemon, but there's something about seeing Pokemon of the Paldea region interact with the environment that I really adore. It is a bit of a bummer though that once you get further into the game, you don't really see this as much because there is so much open space and Pokemon just kind of spawn into random clusters. But Poco Path will always have a really special place in my heart. Now, since we're talking about the open world aspects, we might as well begin the discussion of Paldea as a region. If I'm keeping it real, Paldea is pretty low when it comes to my favorite Pokemon game regions. When I was writing this script and thinking about Paldea as a region, I had to really step back and think about nostalgia and how nostalgia can affect my opinions. Sure, I'm more partial to Sinnoh and Hoenn because I grew up with those games, but do I just prefer them literally because of nostalgia? After thinking thinking about it for a while and making a thought web, I think I can confidently say no here. I genuinely think that Paldea is just pretty boring. For me personally, the towns just aren't very memorable. I think a big reason why this is the case is because you can't go inside a lot of the buildings in towns or interact with that many NPCs. I only ever remember certain towns in Scarlet and Violet because of the sandwich ingredients that their shop sells, and that's about it. To give some examples here with the Hoenn region, I find so many cities and towns super interesting and cool, mainly because of the buildings and NPCs. Some of my favorites include the Lava Ridge Hot Springs and the two grandmas just living their best lives. I also loved Lily Cove because of the Pokemon Trainer fan club members who would get so excited for you once you beat the Pokemon League. Hell, even Dewford Town, a pretty forgettable town, was a fun spot because of the Dewford Hall and the NPC who would tell you the current trendy phrase. Something else that I feel like could be maybe worth mentioning here are the town vibes that specific towns had in Gen 3. When I look at a Gen 3 house, I can tell if it's in Rustboro, Sutopolis, Fortree, Moss Deep, but if you give me a Scarlet and Violet house, it is just not the same. These 3D Gen 9 towns are so empty and boring that I personally find them really forgettable. I never had really any reason to stay in a town and form memories with it because for the most part, there was nothing to do and nobody to talk to. Honestly though, it can be kind of hard to compare a game like Pokemon Emerald to Scarlet and Violet when one is a top-down 2D game and the other an open-world 3D game. When a game is top-down, it feels more crowded. You can only see so much at once, making the environment feel busier. I think it could be interesting to see a town like Rustboro in an open-world 3D setting and see if my opinion changed here. But because Scarlet and Violet doesn't have any memorable buildings or things in its open-world environment, it just sometimes feels super empty. If a comparison to Gen 3 doesn't feel very fair, I honestly think we could also compare Paldea to Galar as well. Something nice about Galar was the towns. The region itself was genuinely pretty lame in my opinion, but man, it had some great towns. Valenlia, Stoinside, and Spikemuth were all standout towns for me. It was just a bit of a shame that the most interesting part of each town was either the stadium or the salon. Despite not having many interesting buildings or interesting NPCs, the towns in Galar were pretty memorable for me because of how unique they all were. I was expecting better with Paldea, but it kind of feels like it was worse. It just feels very, very bland and like there's no personality to these towns or to the region itself. Something that's related to the environment in the Paldea region is music. I thought the music overall was actually pretty fantastic when it came to gym battles and trainer themes, etc. Penny's battle theme and the Sada and Turo theme, absolute bangers. They definitely did not disappoint when it came to battle themes. What I did think was a little lacking when it came to music was the repetitive route theme that played for the majority of my exploration in the game. To be fair though, the theme goes crazy. Like it's pretty great and I really like this song, and I love how the main route theme transitions between daytime to night as well as into wild Pokemon fights, but the theme did get a little old and ended up making Paldea routes and provinces all kind of just lumped together for me. No route felt distinct really. With route names like South Province, Area 1, 2, and 3, I think it's really hard for me to remember which area is which, not just because the name is so bland, but because the music is almost always the same on each route. I think a good counter argument here could be the fact that in previous games, routes were literally just numbers, but because the routes each had their own specific theme, that made routes in previous games really stand out for me. Route 216 is an iconic Gen 4 route, not only because getting in the snow is a very key Gen 4 experience, but because the song is so incredibly good. I was really expecting some incredible music in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, mainly because the music was so good in not only Gen 8, but also Pokemon Legends Arceus. And we absolutely got some really, really great bangers, but I feel like we didn't get enough with Scarlet and Violet. Now, I would like to take a moment to highlight the things I really enjoyed about Paldea as a region. I just want to preface that this is obviously going to include some spoilers. I feel like this whole video, like, why are you watching this if you haven't played the game or if you have intentions of playing the game? The game has been out for almost 2 years now, so I'm assuming either most people have finished it or just dropped it altogether. While a lot of Paldea was lacking for me, Area 0 was probably the coolest area and and thing I've experienced in a Pokemon game in a long time. The music and atmosphere truly felt otherworldly and made Area Zero an incredibly epic way to end the game. But I honestly did find Area Zero a bit empty. I got lost my first time there because everything looked the same, but still, it was a really cool area. I can't remember the last time I was sucked into a story and environment when it comes to Pokemon. A lot of people like to clown on people who play Pokemon for the story, but I can confidently say that the end of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's story is up there in game story, in Pokemon stories. This is one of my all-time favorite video game stories for sure. I just wish we got a little bit more with Area Zero. And with all of this story talk, I think now is a good time to transition into my favorite part of Scarlet and Violet, which is the story. Real quick, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Factor 75. Factor 75 is a never frozen, always fresh meal delivery service that delivers chef-created meals straight to your door. Every dietitian-approved meal is ready to eat in just 2 minutes, taking the stress out of meal planning, letting you skip the grocery store, and giving you more time to get those encounters in for your latest shiny hunt. Factor lets you choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, and Vegan and Vegetarian. Factor also offers snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, and small bites. I work from home and have found Factor to be super helpful during long streams and shiny hunts. And after a long day of editing, it is so nice to have something that doesn't take too long to make and helps me avoid the stress of cooking. If you'd like to try Factor 75 for yourself, you can use my link or code to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. Thank you so much, Factor 75, for sponsoring today's video. I honestly went into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet with literally zero expectations when it came to the story because of how bad Sword and Shield's story was. Like, man, what is this? What is this? And this is coming from somebody who likes Sword and Shield. But this isn't a Generation 8 video. If you'd like to see that though, let me know. I know not many people play Pokemon for the story. Most people are interested in the battling, the collecting, even the shiny hunting, but honestly, I do enjoy some of the stories in Pokemon games. The first video game that ever made me cry as a kid was Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team. That game had me sobbing under the covers at like 9 years old. Most of the time with these main series games, I go into them with my expectations below the ground when it comes to the story. Like, the expectations aren't even on the ground. They are below the ground. So when it came to these games, I knew I probably wasn't going to care for the story much, especially after all the Team Star stuff I saw in the trailers. But man, was I wrong. Before the main story starts, something interesting and new that happens in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the introduction to the box art legendary right from the start. Immediately, the player sees and interacts with the legendary, which was quite surprising. As Pokemon fans, I feel like we are really used to the standard, we hear about the legendary and then we're finally introduced near the end of the story when we're about to either get our 8th gym badge or fight the Elite Four. When we meet the Pokemon, we catch it in an epic battle and then we box it forever. It's great, but with Scarlet and Violet, they introduce you to the legendary and you form a relationship with it throughout the entire game. It's super interesting and a great addition to the franchise in my opinion, and makes navigating this open world a whole lot easier. Now, when the main story of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet actually starts, it splits you up into 3 different paths that you can choose from, really leaning into that open world vibe with the choose your own adventure type narrative. You can choose the Victory Road narrative, which is the classic Pokemon adventure story and you start collecting gym badges. Or you can choose the Path of Legends, helping Arven take down giant Titan Pokemon, learning and collecting ingredients that can help buff your ride Pokemon. Or you can choose Starfall Street, which is the weakest of the 3 in my opinion. I'd like to take a minute here to break down each of these 3 paths you are able to take within the main story, as well as talk about the characters too. We'll start with my least favorite, which is Starfall Street. In the game, Team Star is a group of students from the main academy who are said to be troublemakers and bullies. The director asks the player to battle the 5 different Team Star Star bases within the Paldea region in order to put a stop to Team Star and their rebellious influences on the students at the academy. I think. I talked to a lot of people about the Team Star story and got some interesting perspectives from various people. I had a few people in my Twitch chat talk about how touching and personal the Team Star story was for them because they were bullied whenever they were in school. And I had a few people who felt like the story was a little boring and uninteresting. Unfortunately, I found it a bit uninteresting at times and even unplayable. I didn't really feel or relate to the characters within this story, and I found Clive's character to just be truly ridiculous. But this is a Pokemon game, rated E for everyone, and I can totally see younger folks finding this story funny and a good time. As for the unplayable parts, when you head into these Team Star bases, you use the Let's Go feature where you send out your Pokemon in the overworld to defeat wild Pokemon, and man, it's something. Honestly, this feature in general is pretty great when it comes to grinding levels. It can just sometimes be bad, but really bad specifically in the Team Star bases. Doing the Team Star bases can be so unbearable at times because of the lag and how bad the game plays. This is definitely something to talk about more in the gameplay section of the video, and don't worry, I have a lot of thoughts there, but I truly think a big reason why I didn't find the Team Star story very enjoyable was just because of how unplayable these bases felt. I personally didn't really care for the Starmobiles. I found them a little silly. As for the story itself, a lot of it felt like, I don't know, it could have been an email. We learned that the reason Team Star dropped out of university was because of a scandal that broke out that was the result of them confronting their bullies. We don't really learn much about the scandal or even who was bullying Team Star, and nothing with this story really feels resolved by the end. We just know that the bullies were taken care of. I think it is nice that the Team Star members were able to confide in each other, which resulted in itself the team and their bases. What confuses me about this story is just how vague it is. Team Star decided to stop showing up to school and got this reputation for being bullies. But why? Because of miscommunication and misinformation? What exactly was the scandal that happened? It just felt a little messy at times, but I do want to make it clear that I can totally understand anybody's perspective here who found the story relatable and touching. I had a similar experience whenever I was in 6th grade. I found it really hard to find my place in middle school. I think for me personally, it just was a bit messy and hard to follow at times, but it did give us Penny's theme, which is an absolute banger. Now, just because I found this Pokemon team to be kind of bad doesn't mean every Pokemon team in the past is better. I am a Gen 3 girly through and through, but I am not afraid to say that Team Aqua and Team Magma are so stupid. I do think that nostalgia makes me enjoy those teams, but if we saw something like Team Aqua and Team Magma today in a Pokemon game, people would be roasting and toasting that on Twitter. I think that ever since Gen 5, the evil and antagonistic teams in Pokemon have just kind of fallen off. Team Plasma is by far the most interesting evil team we have gotten, and it is not even close for me. I'm hopeful that we are able to get a Pokemon team that makes us really question the world of Pokemon and morality of Pokemon, but for now we have been dealt Team Star, and unfortunately Team Star fell a little flat for me. Now let's talk Victory Road. Our rival Nemona guides us on the Victory Road path in the main story. This is just the classic collect 8 gym badges and battle the Elite Four at the end, with a few rival fights sprinkled within. The first thing I want to talk about is how much I adored Nemona as a character. She is such a driven, smart, and talented trainer. I love the energy she brings, and she is definitely a great rival. I enjoy a rival who is driven and good at what they do, but I truly believe that when it comes to rivals in Pokemon games, a good story is the best, and personally what I enjoy. I love rivals who are able to learn and grow. For the most part, I really enjoyed the majority of rivals in Pokemon games, but I wasn't really a fan of the crowd of rivals that they gave you in Generation 6. I am one of the rare few who actually enjoyed Hop as a rival and watching him discover himself and learn that he can be his own person. He doesn't have to follow in the steps of his brother. Wally is probably my favorite rival we've gotten in the franchise, as Brendan and May don't really feel like a rival to me at all. Watching Wally pursue his dream of becoming a Pokemon trainer, battling him in Victory Road, it's all just really nice. I love rooting for a rival. Don't get me wrong though, I also love a cocky rival like Silver and Blue, but there really is something about a good wholesome story that I personally really enjoy. And with Nemona, I don't know, I feel like we didn't really get that, but we did get a character who is energetic and driven and overall delight. Nemona is a very talented trainer who at the start of the games is already a champion trainer. She decided to raise a brand new Pokemon team alongside the main character in Scarlet and Violet in order to have a proper rival and friend to battle with. She never hates the main character for beating her in battles, and in fact sees every battle as a ton of fun and a learning experience. I'm never going to get shoved for beating Nemona in a battle, which is pretty epic. I enjoyed how Nemona took a loss because it's something I feel like we could all learn from her. While a loss may feel bad, there is always something to take away from it. And while it can be hard to turn a loss into a positive experience, it is refreshing to see Nemona do so. Nemona never seems jealous of the main character and is always rooting for them and thrilled to see them win and succeed. I really think that we could all take a page out of Nemona's book. I was a little disappointed that we didn't really get much else from Nemona. I was hoping to learn a little bit more about her and her family and story. All we really got about her was that she was a skilled champion ranked trainer who comes from a wealthy family. I wanted to know more about her family and where her work ethic comes from. As for the gyms, I found the majority of the gym trials to be a little trivial and busted. The olive roll, not for me. I can appreciate and respect Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for taking a risk whenever it comes to these gyms, but the trials were not for me, and I much prefer a Pokemon gym. Sword and Shield definitely did the gym trials a lot better than Scarlet and Violet. I personally didn't really find any of the trainers that memorable, I guess except for Larry. But I really think the only reason Larry is memorable for me is just because we end up seeing him later in the game. In reality, all of these gym leaders are quite boring, but I also think that that could just be me getting older. I don't have nostalgia for these characters like I do for these gym leaders when I was younger, and so they're just a little bit more forgettable for me because I have more going on in my adult life. However, the disappointment with these gym leaders and Nemona's story was more than made up for with Arven and the Path of Legends story. When we first met Arven, I was not expecting to enjoy his character really at all, but man was I wrong. Learning that Arven is the son of the professor was pretty crazy, and the fact that the professor walked out after Arven was born created the start of a really interesting story. With the Path of Legends storyline, we learn that Arven wants to defeat 5 Titan Pokemon so that he can grab an ingredient that they are guarding, Herba Mystica. This ingredient is said to heal a Pokemon if it consumes it. Arven tells the player that he's trying to create the world's greatest sandwiches, but he's no good at Pokemon battles and needs help battling these Titan Pokemon. Every Titan Pokemon you defeat in the Path of Legends helps us power up our legendary ride Pokemon. I enjoyed that the Titan Pokemon had cute little cutscenes and a mysterious vibe to them. Arven is clearly keeping a secret from us during the first few Titan Pokemon cutscenes, and it keeps us wanting to know more. Arven's story ended up being super touching for me. He grew up on his own with no parental figure, only Mabosstiff. Arven has had a pretty lonely childhood, and eventually finding out that Arven needed our help with the Titan Pokemon so that he could use the Herba Mystica to help save his sick Pokemon genuinely had me so emotional. Once I found this out during my first playthrough of Violet, I immediately wanted to finish his storyline and put everything else on hold. This storyline felt a lot more rewarding than the other two and felt more connected to the overall Scarlet and Violet Area Zero story, since it involved the professors and the legendary Pokemon. It was emotional for various aspects: Arven's relationship with his parents, the sick Pokemon, Arven's loneliness, and this story really had me rooting for Arven as a character. Something I did find quite interesting at the end of the Path of Legends was when you finally upgraded your legendary Pokemon and Arven's Pokemon is back to being healthy, Arven wants to battle you with his Pokemon. This is insane to me, and I know Arven had a dialogue about how he felt like his Pokemon was ready, but it still seemed like kind of a crazy choice. But honestly, I think that this choice was made to show us that his Pokemon is actually okay now and he can battle again. I really enjoyed Arven's storyline and how it all wrapped up in the end. And once you finish all these 3 main stories, my favorite part of the story begins: the way home. The Way Home storyline unlocks after all 3 previous storylines have been fully completed. Professor Sada, if you're playing Scarlet, and Turo, if you're playing Violet, have made various comments to the player throughout the main game, specifically during Arven's storyline, about the mysterious Area Zero and the Great Crater of Paldea in the middle of Paldea. We find out that the professor is in the crater, and in order to talk to them, we have to venture down in there. This storyline is by far the coolest story we have gotten in a Pokemon game ever. Walking into Area Zero for the first time was truly an incredible experience. Hearing the music and seeing all the crystallized portions of the map felt otherworldly. Now, at times, the Area Zero map felt a little bland and boring, as I mentioned earlier, but there were a lot of cool places to explore, like caves and hills, and seeing these Paradox Pokemon was super cool. And I definitely think Pokemon Scarlet wins here for the better and more interesting Paradox Pokemon. Don't get me wrong, I love Pokemon Violet. I chose Pokemon Violet, and I love the Paradox Pokemon in the game. But naming all of them after Iron, insert word here, was a bit meh for me personally. I'm a sucker for a good time travel trope, so I thought that the Paradox Pokemon were super cool. During Arven's Path of Legend storyline, we actually battle a Paradox Pokemon when we're in the Asado Desert, so it's neat to get some closure on what exactly it was we battled earlier. These Paradox Pokemon are from both the ancient past and distant future. I was a history major in university, so maybe that is why I find these Paradox Pokemon so interesting. But it truly is so cool to look at the Scarlet Pokemon and see historical Pokemon. These Pokemon were brought to the present because of the professor's time machine that they built within Area Zero. However, we learned that Heath, the author of the Scarlet and Violet book that the professors hold, has reported sightings of these Paradox Pokemon hundreds of years before the time machine that the professors built was finished. This makes us think a lot about Area Zero and just where these Paradox Pokemon came from. How did they come to Area Zero in present day? Or is Area Zero even present day at all? This place is so cool and mysterious, and it doesn't leave me frustrated and annoyed, but instead intrigued and mystified. After exploring Area Zero and interacting with various Pokemon, the player is finally introduced to the Professor. I found it so interesting that the legendary Pokemon and Professor in Scarlet and Violet kind of swapped roles. Normally, one of the first characters you meet in a Pokemon game is the Professor, and there's all this build up towards eventually encountering the legendary Pokemon in the game, but Scarlet and Violet completely flipped that around. There was so much build up and mystery towards the Professors. I was super excited to finally meet Turo during my first playthrough, and seeing him for the first time in the Zero Lab confirmed my suspicions that I had literally from the start. He is giving so much robot energy. Normally, I'm not good at calling things when it comes to video game stories, but the way that the Professor acted whenever we were introduced to them via video just made me super suspicious. And honestly, that was probably the intent. Finding out that the original Professor had died, and we had been talking to an AI Professor this entire time, my jaw was literally on the floor. I could not believe it. Like, what the hell? This is incredible. This story is incredible. This feels like a pretty dark story for a Pokemon game. The original professors died from protecting Miraidon or Crydon, the same Miraidon and Crydon that we spent the whole story traveling with. That is so dark and instantly reminded me of Pokemon Plasma, the thoughts on morality with Pokemon. And this story also reminded me a lot of Gen 7 and what the game did with the Ultra Beasts, as well as Lucamine's character compared to the professors here in Gen 9. I'm literally sitting here smiling to myself, thinking about how good this story is. It just makes me super happy to have a Pokemon game with an incredible story after Generation 8 story and whatever that was. The cutscene before battling the AI professors was incredible, and I really loved how both professors only battle with Paradox Pokemon so that we can see what all the Paradox Pokemon looked like. It definitely encouraged me to come back and explore more of Area Zero. I loved the conclusion to the storyline as well. Arven finally getting some closure, and the AI professor either traveling to the ancient past or distant future in order to shut down the time machine. I remember after finishing this game for the first time, I thought about this story a lot. Specifically, I thought about the player's Miraidon or Crydon and its fight against the legendary Miraidon and Crydon in Area Zero. I saw a fan theory on Reddit talking about the possibility of the professor dying during the intro cutscene of the game. And that's why you see the legendary Pokemon flying out of the crater so suddenly in the intro of the game. I thought that this theory was super cool, but we do know that the professor stopped keeping up with Arven a few years ago before this cutscene takes place, but truly, who knows? I love this story so much because there is so much discussion and theory around it. I truly feel like we could talk about it all day. As I have mentioned previously, I was super disappointed with the Generation 8 story. So to be given this absolutely incredible story with an incredible atmospheric area for it to take place in, I could gush on and on about this story. And honestly, it does get better in the DLC. Okay, I just said a lot of great stuff about these games, but despite all the good that Scarlet and Violet were able to pull off with the story, it's time to talk about the gameplay and performance, which in my opinion is the worst part of these games. When I played Pokemon Scarlet for the first time, I was super excited and I had a lot of fun. I did a whole 24-hour stream over on my Twitch channel and really enjoyed my time. But during that stream, I did have a few incidents. When I walked up to one of the first towns in the game, I interacted with a Pelipper and my game crashed. It's frozen. It's not letting me move. Is this supposed to happen? How do I move? Why am I stuck here? This was the beginning of my why is this game kind of bad thought process. When I was on my way to the first gym, I remember seeing texture warping on every sloping cliff. Whoa. I'll see how the mountains are moving like that. I normally don't mind when games look kind of bad, as long as they're playable. We'll get to that. But I remember seeing this warping and genuinely thinking, oh, that's no good. And the first time I ever made a sandwich in this game, I couldn't believe how bad it looked. On those oh, I'm timed for this? Okay. Respectfully, this looks terrible. Sandwiches are a huge part of Scarlet and Violet. Arven's Path of Legends storyline focuses a lot on sandwich making, and literally almost every interactive building in Paldea is a sandwich shop. You would think that the sandwich making would look even a little bit alright, and to this day, almost 2 years later, it still looks bad. The first few weeks of Scarlet and Violet's release, people on Twitter were having a ball, posting ridiculous screenshots, clips, and glitches of bugged gameplay. It was crazy the amount of memes that went around solely based on just how bad the games played. It makes sense why these games get a lot of hate. These games play terribly. Doing anything in the water can be super slow and laggy, and there are certain areas in the game where the lag is literally unreal. Specifically, Casseroya Lake and Tag Tree Thicket are two good examples. It's so bad in Tag Tree Thicket that the community has renamed that area to Lag Tree Thicket. The performance issues are very bad in this game, so much so that a lot of people deem Scarlet and Violet as unplayable. And I think this is where people in the community kind of start to butt heads a little bit. A lot of people find these games unacceptable and embarrassing. No one should give these games time or money. And then there are others who find the bugs and glitches to be funny and actually make the games more silly and fun for them. I definitely say I fall kind of in the middle of these two opinions, and I honestly think the majority of people fall more so in the middle. While I totally understand anyone who can't play these games because of the performance issues, for me personally, it didn't make the games unplayable, just unenjoyable. Only certain parts of the games were unplayable for me, like the Team Star bases when you had to use the Let's Go feature.
This is not nearly as laggy as usual. Oh my god. Did you all see? I'm gonna keep my mouth shut about the lag.
There have been a few times during my exploration where I would try to use my ride Pokemon to jump on a cliff or something and then get stuck for 3 minutes. Sometimes my game will freeze for a good 30 seconds and I'll think my game has crashed. There is a lot more that I could talk about when it comes to performance issues with these games, but honestly, this is something that has been talked about so much on the internet that I'm just gonna leave it there. They play bad. They play bad. Nothing I have said in this portion of the video has been a new, original, or interesting take. It just is what it is. They play terribly. Most people know that these games play pretty bad, and I just don't feel like dragging this conversation on longer than it needs to be and pointing out every single bug that I've encountered. Now, besides the game playing poorly, which is definitely my biggest complaint of the game, there are a few choices I found to be quite interesting and pretty bad in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. One of the biggest complaints we often see is the fact that there is no shiny noise indicator. Shiny Pokemon just pop up in the overworld and you only get a noise once you engage in battle. This is super dumb, and it makes shiny hunting's accessibility just awful in Scarlet and Violet compared to games like Legends Arceus, where we get not only a noise, but an overworld sparkle as well. Another choice that I thought was kind of bad was the limited character customization in these games. Pokemon Sword and Shield had such incredible customization options, and Scarlet and Violet took an insane step backwards with this. It is crazy to me that Scarlet and Violet have a D-pad button dedicated to character customization, and it's so limited. We have 4 school uniforms to choose from, and then a little bit more if you get the DLC. Even Legends Arceus had more options than this. And don't even get me started on Terra Raids, man. Literally don't even get me started. Terra Raids have been broken for so long. I don't even know if they're still broken, but I'm sure they are. Either they are lagging behind, the shield is broken. I found them so miserable that I stopped doing the event raids like a year ago. I like terrestrialization a lot, but I found Terra Raids to be so miserable that I went back to doing Dynamax Adventures and Sword and Shield. Now, before we transition into the outro here, I want to touch on something here, and that's battling. You may have noticed that I haven't mentioned anything about competitive Pokemon in Gen 9 or battle mechanics, and that is because I simply have no thoughts. I am not much of a battler. I very much play Pokemon for the shiny hunting, collecting, and story. I do know that I enjoy terrestrialization about as much as I enjoy Dynamaxing. It's a cool idea, and it looks cool. And that's all I really feel like I can say as someone who just never battles. The majority of the trainer battles in Scarlet and Violet are optional, which I think kind of contributes to the emptiness that I feel with this story and region. I skipped a lot of trainers because of this, so I definitely didn't battle as much as I feel like I normally do when it comes to Pokemon games. And I'm not a competitive battler. You are literally looking at somebody who brought a metronome only team to the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Twitch Rivals event last year. You don't want my opinions. You don't want my opinions here. So that's all I can really say about battling. I thought terrestrialization was pretty cool. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts and opinions on Gen 9 and the battling scene, how it compares to previous gens, what you think is better, what you think is worse. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, but I think it's time to wrap up this rodeo. If you wrap up rodeo, how do you end rodeos? I don't know. Okay, 20 pages later, we are nearing the end of this video and script. We've talked about a lot. Specifically, I've talked about the environment of Paldea, the storylines, and the gameplay. I think my overall thesis statement here when it comes to these games is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are extremely flawed and unenjoyable games to play with the best Pokemon story we have gotten in a mainline Pokemon game in forever. Pokemon gave us an emotional story full of love, loss, grief, and I feel so grateful that I was able to experience this story completely spoiler-free. But once the story is over, that's really it for the casual player. Like, there is, if you want a shiny hunt, that's great, but the gameplay is so bad that I don't find myself playing it at all anymore. It's really hard to explore the game beyond the main story because of how poorly the performance can be, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, since they are quite controversial games these days. Did you find them unplayable? What did you make of the story? I'm hoping that 2024 is a year full of nothing when it comes to Pokemon games and news. I'm hopeful that they saw and heard our complaints and are taking their time with Legends ZA. I hope that they're creating a game that has the same incredible story that Scarlet and Violet had, but looks and plays a little bit more like Sword and Shield. Again, please let me know your thoughts on Scarlet and Violet, because genuinely I enjoy talking about these games. They were so close. They really made a great game. It's just so hard to play at times. And also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you hope to see with future Pokemon games. Are you hopeful or are you feeling kind of bad? I love Pokemon and I am choosing to stay optimistic when it comes to the future of Pokemon. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your weekend. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Snorlax is in the game.